test. 1, 2, test, test. Test, test. 1, 2, test, 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 test. Mic 1. Mic 1. 1, 1, 1, 1.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Happy New Year, and welcome to our first general meeting of the year 2024. I'm Farzana Seddon, your current serving president. Last year was a successful year for KCWC, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank all volunteers of KCWC for the wonderful contributions each of you have made to our club over the last year. A big thanks and appreciation to our members who have supported us in the past year, and thanks to those who have been loyal to our club and renewed their membership. And thanks to our new members for choosing our club to serve them. 2024 is set to be another exciting year for us as we aim to provide an outstanding experience for both our old and new members. I'm delighted to announce our guest speaker, Mr. Gus Christie, Executive Chairman of one of the largest opera houses in the world, Glyndebourne. I now would like to hand over to Professor Eve Middleton Kelly, who would host today's meeting. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm absolutely delighted to see you all here. And I want to introduce Gus Christie. Gus graduated from King's College London with a degree in zoology, nothing to do with opera. He worked in various theatres before working as a cameraman for Partridge Films from 1989 to 91. He went freelance in 1991 and worked on various natural history documentaries. He then became executive chairman of Glyndebourne in 2000. 4 years later, in 2004, his interest in natural history inspired him to develop an environmental strategy for Glyndebourne, and he started on a project to build a 67-meter wind turbine, and we will be talking about that later on, to power the Opera House via renewable energy. Today, believe it or not, the turbine provides more than 100% of the needs of the Opera House, and again, we'll be discussing that in a moment. And Gus is married to the international soprano Danielle Denise. So, Gus, I'm delighted to welcome you.
Pleasure. Very nice to be here. Good morning.
As you know, I'm a passionate opera lover and come to Glyndebourne 2, 3, 4 times a year. So let us start at the beginning with John Christie, your grandfather, and his ultimate romantic gesture in 1934 to build an opera house for his wife, Audrey, who was an opera singer. But there must have been more than that. So can you please sketch for us the inception and birth of the Glyndebourne Annual Festival and of the Opera House?
Certainly. It's quite a long story, but there was a play actually written by David Hare recently, I don't know whether, called A Moderate Soprano, which I wasn't particularly happy about the title, but that was all about the origins of Glyndebourne. I mean, opera for him was a hobby. He used to go to Bayreuth as a young man in his motor car. He'd get it towed across the channel on a raft because there were no car ferries in those days, and then drive to Bayreuth. He had two loves in life: cars and Wagner, and so he would go to Bayreuth, and it inspired him really. He inherited the estate at Glyndebourne as a young man from his grandfather, actually, and he built a large room called the organ room in the 1920, and he put on scenes from various operas, a lot of Wagner operas, and there were various amateur singers and a few professional singers, including himself. He wasn't a professional singer, but he played the role of Beckmesser in Meistersinger, and I think the housemaid had to be taken out because she was laughing so hard when she saw her boss playing the role. Anyway, he met my grandmother during one of these concerts, and she came to sing the role of Blondie, and he took a shine. He was a 50-year-old bachelor at the time, and he then pursued her and wooed her, and she was 15 years younger than him, and they got married in the early 30s. And he wanted then. She was singing everywhere, and he was going to extend this organ room and make it bigger. And she said, "For God's sake, John, if you're going to spend all that money, do the thing properly," which was sort of famous line. So he built her an opera house in the kitchen garden, basically. And he owned a local building company, the Ringmer Building Works, which built it. 300-seater, and it was a kind of crazy idea to build an opera house in the middle of the Sussex countryside. But and then it was actually Nazi Germany, in a way, that came to our rescue. We had two Jewish emigres that were at the top of their game in Germany at the time. Karl Ebert, director of Berlin, and Fritz Busch, music director of Dresden Opera. Both through a series of coincidences sort of heard about this eccentric Englishman's idea of building an opera house in the Sussex countryside, and met with John, who was very persuasive, and he persuaded them to come over and give him a hand. So he got lucky from the beginning with Busch and Ebert, who basically set the musical and artistic standards to which we still aspire today. But and we opened on the 28th of May 1934 with The Marriage of Figaro, and my grandmother sang the role of Susanna. He wanted to do Wagner, but he was persuaded by Busch and Ebert that perhaps if you put the audience on the stage and the stage in the auditorium, you might be able to do it. It was just the wrong dimensions. It was more suited for Mozart. So it was Mozart in the early years. And I think 7 people got off the train on the opening night. And then it's been pretty much sold out ever since. The word spread that there was something magical going on in the Sussex countryside, but it was a mad idea. But thank God, we're 90 years old this year, so it's still there.
Yes, that's
slightly different to what it was back then, but
yes, that's wonderful. So people came just from local area, or
people came from. I mean, not many came from London. I mean, on the first night, but then I think it was southeast, really. Yeah, at that stage, and we were very much casting internationally from the beginning, and it's always been an international opera festival. So if we were doing German repertoire, we'd try and get some German native speakers. Same with French or Italian or Russian, or it's not always the case, but it does help with if they can speak the language. But we do have diction coaches and all of that who can help language coaches.
What about the wonderful long interval? When was that introduced?
From the beginning.
Oh,
from the beginning. No, it was I think it's a great way of taking the time and just sort of. It's not great for singers so much. Some operas they need the break, but Wagner. But for they're used to normally having 20 minutes, and suddenly to have 80 minutes for a singer is quite. You got to fill the time somehow and sort of then gear yourself up again for going back on. But for the audiences, I think it's one of the successes of Glyndebourne to have that
it is,
time.
Absolutely, because it's part of the experience. It's part of the Glyndebourne experience to have that wonderful long interval, to walk around the gardens. And if you haven't been, you really must. It really is very much part of it. And I
It
think
is,
that
it's-
you remember both the pleasure of the music plus the pleasure of sitting out in that garden, drinking champagne, walking around, looking at everyone else with their beautiful clothes. And it's really gorgeous.
We kind of want for people to kind of take some time out really, and not just rush and see something and then go. It slows people down having that interval. I think, and
but the other thing I like is you have a whole range from young people, a young couple sitting on the grass eating their picnic, to people sitting on tables with candelabra. I've actually seen candelabra and a butler.
Yeah.
No, seriously.
Yeah, well,
It's wonderful to just see the whole range and everyone feeling comfortable.
yeah. Well, thankfully, the Brits are creatures of habit,
Yeah.
and so we'll come back year after year, often sort of, and go and sit in the same place in the garden.
Yes.
Bring the same food, probably come with the same people, and it's just part of the ritual.
Yes. But you must have a whole army of gardeners because it looks always so wonderful.
We've got 5 full-time and a few volunteers, but yes, it's and there's a lot of people who know quite a lot about horticulture who come to Glyndebourne, so they're going around with a critical eye in the borders.
No, the planting is incredibly interesting and creative.
Well, we have a wonderful consultant called John Hoyland, who's been with us about 10 years, and we have our head gardener's been with us for 30 years. So he knows what grows and what doesn't grow. And it's constantly evolving, the gardens. I mean, they're so I think, we put up a rose garden for my mum about 10 years ago, and we've sort of expanded the area around the lake where people picnic. So there's sort of more space, and just sort of it's there's a sort of series of rooms. There's a beautiful orchard, and it's I mean the views are fantastic. We're blessed. I think that's one of the reasons why we're still there.
One of the joys is having so many young people involved. Because, for example, when we book a table with our picnic, and it's always young people bringing us our picnic and bringing the coffee and so on. So are they volunteers or? No,
they're employed.
All right.
We contract out the catering, thank God. So we don't have to hire all of that. But and it's been the Compass Group for over 40 years. So there's a lot of local kids that get employed, and we are the biggest employer in the area. So it's we get a lot of return. I mean, it was Brexit hasn't helped, and 22 was a particularly challenging year when we had to use a lot of agencies because. And we had to we got 3 restaurants at Glyndebourne, so we can cater for about half of the audience. We now have a 1,250 seat theatre, so we can cater for about 600 in the 3 restaurants, and then everyone else. We also provide picnics if people want to buy a picnic, or you can bring your own. So there's a range from high-end restaurants to bringing a sandwich.
Yes, exactly. Okay, let's go to your father now. So the Opera House, as you said, became very successful, but was simply not large enough. So George Christie, your father, then rebuilt it in 1992 and is today's modern opera house with its magnificent gardens. So can you tell us what it was that George Christie, your father...
well, he took over from his dad. John died in 1962, just the year before I was born. And my dad took over sort of in 1960 really. So and by then it had grown to a 830 seater. So it had expanded since the original. And then the 60s and 70s were a tough period, and so he was living from one year to the next, and sponsorship began in the sort of mid-60s, and it was mainly the cigarette companies who bailed us out. But it sort of the standards he kept very high, and then the 80s was a golden decade at Glamorgan, when we had Peter Hall as the artistic director and Bernard Haitink as the music director, and Brian Dickey was the general director, there was the demand for tickets exceeded the supply. So, and it was by then, it was 50 plus years old, the theatre, and it was starting to leak, and it was hot. There was no air conditioning. I don't know whether anyone came to the old theatre, but it had a lot of charm, but it wasn't the most comfortable of experiences, and especially for the poor singers who had to wear a lot of costumes. So it became increasingly obvious to my dad that he couldn't really expand the existing theatre, that he would have to knock it down and build another one. Outrage amongst most of the members, who kind of was sort of nostalgic really about the old, and they don't like change. Anyway, he slowly kind of drip fed them through the 80s that he was going to do this. And then it was a question of how he was going to pay for it. And so back then, about 25% of the audience were corporate. And he went to all the corporate members at the height of the boom in the late 80s, and basically took each individual corporate around a model. We went out to tender to find the right architect, and we ended up with Michael Hopkins, who did the stand at Lord's, and he'd never built an opera house, but anyway, it was the right decision. And so he had this model that he would take the corporates around, and basically it was his sort of passion that they could all see, and then they came up with a sort of a scheme. If you paid a certain amount of money, you get access to a certain number of seats. And he raised all the money in the late 80s, and then built the opera house in a recession in the early 90s. So he got his timing spot on. And we had a wonderful project manager, and Bovis built it, and it was an exciting time. And there was sort of not full agreement on the board at the time. I joined the board in the mid-80s, so I was around, and it was a major gamble, but he could see that it was the only way for Glyndebourne to survive into the 21st century was to have a new theatre. We could only miss one season as well, and we started building the new theatre at the beginning of 1992, and then we had the festival in 92 in the old theatre, and then there was a sort of a hoarding around the building site with little portholes in it, so all the audiences could look at the new Glyndebourne rising up from the ashes, and that was clever as well, because they could see that it was actually happening, and that provided the final impetus to raise the last 10 million that we were short. It ended up costing 34 million, which was pretty cheap actually. And had we been a year or so later, I think it would have been but it was the recession that helped us there. 300 brickies on site and 90 joiners, and it all was on a very, very tight time frame, because we could only afford to miss 1 year. And we performed at the Royal Festival Hall in 93, the year that it was being built. And then it was finished on time and on budget, which was pretty miraculous. And we opened May 28th, 1994, with The Marriage of Figaro. Not my grandmother. Exactly 60 years to the day later. And it was hailed a huge success. I mean, and it won all the awards from the design and the bricks and the concrete and the wood, and it's the auditorium is it's a beautiful auditorium to go into, and the Dad was particularly keen on the lighting, and you can sort of just wanted to transform people and take them out of their world and into another one, and it's a horseshoe shape. The old one was a rectangular box, and this is a horseshoe shape, and so the acoustics are fantastic, and the sight lines are terrific, and there's air conditioning, and there's leg room. So it's a very, it's 30 years old this year, so there's a lot of ongoing maintenance and everything, but I won't be knocking it down. It is. I'll leave that to the next generation, and it allows us to do a lot more of the larger repertoire that we weren't able to do in the old theatre. So Wagner and some of the bigger repertoire has now. We can do most of it. I mean, it's still brilliant for Mozart and for Handel, and it's thank God he did it. It was a great success. So, yeah.
I can in fact support all that, because I think from personal experience it is visually very pleasing. Acoustically, it doesn't matter where you sit, and also, as you say, the sight lines. So you can go from the cheapest seats to the most expensive and still have a wonderful opera experience. But the point also is that it is supported almost exclusively by donations. So can you tell us a little more about that? So it does not depend on any government grant except for the touring, and we'll talk about the touring in a moment.
No,
but can you tell us about the festival? Yeah,
well, we've never had public funding, and so it has been box office and membership and sponsorship, really, the main three sources of income. So number one prerogative is to fill the house. So we did very well last year, thank God. Our post-pandemic bounce, and we sold 97% so over 90,000 seats over 3.5 months. So it's about 65% of our income. We turn over about 30 million a year, and 25% is membership and donation. So we have to raise 5-6 million a year, and thankfully we have lots of very generous people who are, in a way, I call them our private arts council, they're part of the family, and they if they meet the singers, they meet the directors, we get to know them, and we have an AGM once a year. We got one in a couple of weeks' time where we invite them all, and we tell them exactly what our challenges are, and they get to know us. And I think that's sort of is and we have a very wonderful lady who runs our development team, who knows about opera. She's worked at Glyndebourne for 30 years, and she was a stage manager, so she's knowledgeable, you meet some wonderful people. I mean, it's some are more demanding than others, but want the red carpet. But some are just like what we do, and so long may that continue.
Absolutely. Okay, now let's look at you. You started your career with other interests. So what brought you back to Glyndebourne in 2000?
Well, yeah, perfect training to take over an opera house, to read zoology at university, and which was one of my early passions. And I was down the road here at King's College, London, and I then worked as a sort of bit of a roving naturalist for a bit, and then I did a year in theatres, because my dad, when I was about 19, he took me up the hill and sort of mentioned that he thought I might be quite good at doing Glyndebourne. I thought, oh God, he's got me in his sights. And it daunted the hell out of me. And but it sort of, he planted a seed, and he was very clever about not forcing me, but just encouraging me. And so he was 65 on the 31st of December 1999. So, and he'd been running it for 40 years. And so I always, that was sort of D-Day in my mind when he was going to retire, which is what turned out. But I joined the board when I was in my late 20s while the rebuild was going on and the discussions. And I still hadn't really made up my mind. I was a wildlife filmmaker for 10 years and living out in the bush. And so I had plenty of time to kind of reflect on inheritance. And it's not an easy pill. But Glyndebourne is, it's quite an unusual one. And I'm very glad I did. I mean, and actually, weirdly, there's some similarities between making a wildlife documentary and putting on an opera. It's all about the people, really, and if you get the right combination of talent, be it sort of the filmmaker and an editor and a composer and a scriptwriter and or your director and designer and singers, you're basically trying to create something that is entertaining and inspiring. So it is, and if one aspect of that mix is wrong, it can let the whole side down, and it's full of risk. I mean, opera. We're planning 4 years in advance, and we're hiring up and coming creative people as well as more established ones, and putting them together with, conductor, with a director, with a designer, and you never quite know how it's going to end up. But you can, and if you get some big names, it doesn't mean you're going to get a good end result, as we found out.
You're also in competition with every other international opera house, aren't you?
Not really. I mean, I mean,
in terms of getting the singers,
yeah. I mean, we have
conductors.
We have a brilliant casting consultant, who's Paul Moe, who's been with us quite a long time, and he's worked in the Bastille, he's worked in Munich, he's worked in Chicago. He knows it's quite a small world, the world of opera singers, actually. And if you've got someone like him, all the agents will, if they've got a rising star, will give him a ring, because they know that if he likes them and the casting committee at Glyndebourne like them, they'll get a job. So we get to hear about any up and coming exciting, and we have one of the big strengths of Glyndebourne. I mean, it is all about discovering talent, and so we have a chorus who start their professional careers with us, and we scour all the music colleges in this country and audition them, and we select the best ones to come in the chorus the following year. And we have a wonderful chorus master and a chap called Stephen Naylor, who is the director of artistic administration, and it's a great place to start your career off, and you get to meet the top conductors and directors. So that's, I mean, you go to these other opera houses around the world, and they have the chorus are on staff, and so they're aging choruses who are kind of getting bad backs and all this kind of stuff, and the directors can't kind of get out of them what they get out of our chorus at Glyndebourne, who are young, enthusiastic, trying to make a good impression, and then if they're good, they get to sing sort of smaller roles, and will climb the ladder quickly. And so we've started a lot of very top opera singers' careers at Glyndebourne. The list is long.
Yes, and I think that's the other thing I wanted to discuss with you, which is your support of new talent, because the touring opera starts at Glyndebourne in the autumn, and then tours around the UK.
Used to.
Exactly, because it was the only part that had a government grant, now that has been withdrawn.
Yeah.
So what is happening?
Well, my dad started the tour in 1968, and that was to take Glyndebourne to a wider audience. So there was a political reason back then, but also it is a part of this talent development, and so it's a great way of blooding young talent, be they singers or conductors. And also then it was for logistical reasons as well, because if you just have a festival, it's to keep key personnel busy year round. Otherwise, you lose them, and then it's not a secure job sort of thing. So it's harder to rehire them. So there were sort of three reasons, and it went around the country to 4, 5, 6 towns a week in each town. Norwich, Plymouth we used to go to, Manchester, Liverpool, Southampton, Milton Keynes, Canterbury, various towns we've gone to, Stoke-on-Trent. And it was, the Arts Council would sort of, the spheres of influence. So there was Welsh National Opera did the sort of west, Opera North did the north, and Glyndebourne did the sort of south. That was the sort of basic premise, though there was quite a lot of overlap. And it was a great success, and it was a great way of us testing out the talent and all that. But then it kind of the grant they gave us was about 1.6 million a year, and that was standstill for about 20 years, and so the costs were going up, and we were losing about $500,000 a year. So it was kind of unsustainable. And then, November 22, they in their wisdom, cut the grant by 52%. So we now get 800,000, which is basically not enough to be able to go. It's expensive to tour. So unfortunately, we had to cancel the tour. There was uproar from the regional theatres that we went to. And it was the opposite of what the government, I think, were, levelling up. I think now Liverpool doesn't have any opera. And so it's a bit of a mess. And now they're doing the review after they've made the cuts. So they got that the wrong way around.
So is there any possibility that they may reinstate it?
There is, but I think what we're now doing and what we did this last 2 years, and we're going to build on, is basically we're going to just concentrate on at home and do more in the surrounding area. We have a thriving learning and engagement department, we go to lots of local schools and care homes and community centres, and we're just trying to do more within Sussex, which I think sort of makes sense. So if they came back and said, we'd like you to go back to, we would consider it, but I think, who knows? I mean, I think we're kind of waiting to see how the dust settles a bit, and English National Opera have been hit in the neck, and they've been, they kicked the can down the road on that one to 2029, but they're looking at going to Manchester, which if I was Opera North, I wouldn't be very happy about, because they'd be parasitising their audiences, and there isn't a huge demand for opera up north. So, we struggled to fill the Empire in Liverpool, for instance. So you need to do a lot of work to encourage your locals to give it a go. And I think the longer you're there, the more chance you have. But we do a lot of audience development at Glyndebourne. We have school matinees for all the local school children. We want every school child in the area to have some experience of opera. We do streamings into cinemas. We do under 30 subsidised seats. So we try a lot of ways of trying to get tomorrow's audience over the threshold and just to give opera a go, because it comes with all these misconceptions of, elitism, and people are wary of going, if they don't know anything about opera, they think it's only for the sort of rich, so there's all these challenges we have, and you go to continental Europe and it's part of everyday life. But in this country, it's not, and the politicians don't help because they kind of accuse each other of sort of champagne socialism if they're seen at an opera house, which is ridiculous. So we will, keep banging the drum.
Because the schools is something else I wanted to discuss with you. So apart from the performances that you offer schools, what else does your wonderful education department do with schools and local communities?
We have a Glyndebourne Youth Opera group, so we have children from the age of 9 to 19. So we have different kind of stages, but they are. We work with them with experts in coaching, and we have a series of concerts in December now, Christmas concerts, where they get to sing with our chorus on stage, and we have this thing called a sing up. So they. You don't have to be a young person. Actually, anyone can come from the local community and sing part of the Messiah or something, And then every 3 years we do a community opera. So that's for all ages. We're doing one. The next one is next year. It's called Uprising by Jonathan Dove, who's and it's all about climate change and inspired by Greta Thunberg. So it'll be performed in February of 25, and that's, we have about 100 local people on stage, and then lots of amateurs in the pit as well, musicians playing alongside professionals. So, and then we have a Glyndebourne Academy, which scours the country, because trying to find talent from less privileged backgrounds. So we have a wonderful vocal coach, Mary King, who and so we'll have sort of summer residencies with these young singers who will come to Glyndebourne and spend a couple of weekends there and go to rehearsals, go to performances, and sing as well. And we've discovered, and there is a sort of people have started in the youth opera and now are in our chorus, for instance. So there is a progression for some, but it's just trying to kind of embrace as much as we can in the local community.
Yes, I think you've done so much, but I want to come back now to the wind turbine.
Yeah.
Because I think that is something that concerns us all. The idea of being carbon neutral, the idea of renewable energy. And when we were talking earlier, you said that in fact you made $1 million last year.
We saved $1 million.
Yeah, we saved $1 million.
By having it.
Because any surplus is sold back to the grid. And yet, at the beginning, you had quite a lot of resistance from local residents. Oh. So can you tell us a little bit about those challenges? But also, I'd like you to talk to us about some other technological innovations that you've introduced, like, and I think you mentioned that earlier, you were the first opera house to offer opera at the cinema.
Yeah.
So if you can bring those two, shall we say, the technological innovations, and tell us
the wind turbines is another long story, but I could see it. I mean, not long after I took over from my dad, that climate change and global warming was an issue, and so I wanted to do our bit reducing our carbon emissions. So we went out to get advice, and we ended up with a company that advised us to put up a wind turbine on the hill above Glyndebourne, which is called Mill Plain, where there used to be a windmill, which blew down in a storm in the 1920s. Anyway, it was the perfect place because it's sort of it's not right up at the top, but it's on a sort of low-lying ridge, and it's got unimpeded access all 360 degrees. So wherever the wind's blowing, it swivels around and captures the wind. And it's about 400 meters from Glyndebourne. So we set about getting permission and all that, and we had a lot of local. Well, not a lot, but quite some vociferous local antagonism. And the planning officer, it was just before it became a national park. We're now in a national park, but it was designated at that point. And the planning officer in Lewis recommended refusal to his councillors, but he was overturned by 5 votes to 4, or 6 votes to 5, I can't remember. We got it. And it was quite a surprise, but it was then called in for a public inquiry, and it was the first of its kind in the area, so I wasn't surprised. And it was Natural England that had called it in. So we had a full-blown kind of court case in the hotel in Lewis with everybody. I mean, we were up against the South Downs National Park, the CPRE, the Natural England, the Council for National Parks, I mean, all of them. And it was us and the council, and an independent inspector, and it was, and we had witnesses and barristers, and it cost us a lot of money, as it did the opposition. And I asked David Attenborough if he'd mind being a witness, and he agreed, which was shut them up. They kind of, as soon as he was in the witness box, they wanted to get him out, but they were all trying to get his autograph at the same time. He basically came up with a very simple 2-page statement, which said that the South Downs was one of the most man-made parts of our planet, and 400 years ago it was covered in woodland, which we've chopped down and introduced sheep. Which has now had poems written about these sort of, these whale-backed kind of downs, and but it's not natural. It's all been man-made, and Glyndebourne should be applauded in trying to reduce its carbon emissions. And he remembers the coal when he was a youngster and all this. And anyway, so it got permission. The inspector concluded that the benefits of Glyndebourne reducing its carbon emissions by 50% outweighed the negative visual impact of having one turbine up on the hill. And I think that when it's up, we got permission for 25 years, it's been up for about 12 years. We got lucky in this whole process because initially there were these renewable obligation certificates, and so the payback would have been about 15 years. And then there weren't many people doing it, or there were a lot of delays in people getting permission. So they introduced higher subsidies, the feed-in tariffs, which meant that the payback was about half that amount of time. So that was luck. It cost about £1.5 million, the whole thing to put up, and we paid it off within 7 years. And I was very tempted to write a letter, a thank you letter to the local people, because they helped me out, but I resisted that one. And it's we painted it grey to blend in with the English sky, and battleship grey, and it's an object of beauty. I mean, and the engineering is fantastic. It's a German machine, an Enercon, and it's an extraordinary bit of human engineering, and it should be applauded. And I mean, yes, you shouldn't plaster the downs in them. And the big concern actually was it was going to open the floodgates, and everyone was going to they're going to be put up everywhere. Not one has gone up since. in the South Downs National Park as it is now. When they're putting them out to sea, but it is. I think there will be uproar when it comes down. So I can't do that. Well, who knows? It's got another 10 years to run, so I don't know what the technology will be like in 10 years' time. But it has, and also what it has done is really inspired the whole company to think in more environmental ways. So we now have a sort of environmental champions group in the company, and we have, so we're all the people that we do trades with, like the printing company that makes our program book. We're careful with, we do it with the greener ones, and we've got LED lighting pretty much across the whole site now. So we're actually using a lot less power. And in the summer, we're importing from the grid when the wind isn't blowing so much, and we use a lot of electricity, as you can imagine. So as Eve was saying, we saved £1 million last year by having it because the electricity went through the roof. So thank God we had it, and then in the winter we're exporting because we're not operating as much, and the wind is blowing a hoolie often, and so it's been a great success.
Yes, and I think the timing probably worked out very well as well, because people are becoming a lot more aware of renewable energy. Tell us a little bit about the filming.
The filming. So that the Met were the first opera house in the world to go into cinemas, and we were the first UK opera house, I think in 2002 actually, with Carmen. And it was, the idea really was to kind of reach out to wider audiences, and the cinema is a less intimidating place for many than the opera house, but it hasn't really worked, and I think we've. During the pandemic, we'd built up quite a catalogue of operas that we'd filmed. And so in the pandemic, every Sunday we would put out one of our operas for quite a few. About a year or something. And we had about 800,000.
We've seen a few of them with my friends. Yes.
Okay, we had about 800,000 people tuning in around the world watching Glyndebourne previously, recorded operas, and they would all get dressed up and have a picnic in their back gardens and all of that, and it was a wonderful thing. So that gave us the sort of we thought, okay, well then there seems to be a demand for this. So we started a video on demand service called Glyndebourne Encore, and the subscription was about £80 a year, not a lot. And then you would we'd film all the new productions every year and concerts, and we'd put in new content as well as you could access the previous content. But that hasn't worked.
Oh.
And I think what's happened is that everyone got so during the pandemic you watched at home, but now that everything's been lifted, people want to go and see the real thing. And there's so much also, there's a lot of other houses. There's Covent Garden, there's the Met everywhere. So we're rowing back from it, because it costs quite a lot of money to film. It's about £200,000 to kind of take seats up, put cameras in, and all the kit and caboodle. And we're not, you're not going to see a return on that. Yes. So it's sort of, and other places are finding exactly the same thing.
But I think the point here is taking the opportunity when it offers itself, and then adapting when its time is over. And I think that's the main thing.
I think it's the live experience. So we want people to come and see the real thing.
Yeah. Our last question. We're coming to the end, and then we'll open it to questions. Glyndebourne's artistic standards are high in both the classic repertoire, in new commissions, and in bringing to the stage some rare gems. And in particular, I want to mention Ethel Smythe the Records. Because I was at the opening night in 2022 and simply loved it. I believe that the first time that the opera had been performed in its entirety, I think, was at Glyndebourne, because Ethel Smythe was obviously a woman, and at the time she was a suffragette, so that gives you the point in time when she was composing, and it was astonishing what conductors and producers did to her opera. They would cut it quite significantly. And I read somewhere, it may have been the program, that there was one performance, I think it was Germany, where they had cut it so much that she walked up to the conductor, took his button away, and she said, no. I applaud her that she had the guts to actually do such a thing. And yet, what Glyndebourne did is you did the research, you found the original libretto, the original score, and it was the first time that it was produced in its entirety. And as I said, it was highly acclaimed. I was very fortunate to be there on the first night, and I absolutely loved it. That's the sort of thing I applaud. So can you tell us a little bit about other firsts and some of the awards earned by Glyndebourne for its outstanding work to finish off our discussion?
Sure, thank you. I mean, we commission a new opera probably once every decade, but that wasn't a new one. That was an existing one. The last Hamlet was the last, exactly, which was 2017 or somewhere around there. And Brett Dean, the Australian composer, and Matthew Jocelyn, Vladimir Yurovsky, who was our previous music director, and Neil Armfield. And it was a wonderful collaboration, and it was a great success. And Alan Clayton was a fantastic Hamlet. And it went to the Met, huge success over there. They hired our production, and Alan and co sang it, a lot of our cast.
Are you bringing it back?
I hope so. It's a big undertaking, and it went to Germany, and it's got legs. I mean, so it's now become part of the repertoire. A lot of the new works that are commissioned end up in a bottom drawer, and Wexford Opera Festival in Ireland might put them on, but they don't get done very often. So it's rare for one to kind of actually work, and so we got. The next one we're looking at, I think, is in 2029 or something like that. But and yeah, we did quite a bit of Birtwhistle back in the 90s. We had a general director at the time, Anthony Whitworth Jones, who was very, very keen on contemporary opera. Hans Werner Henze back in the 60s, Nicholas Moore. So yeah, it's they're not easy to sell, and we used to sort of they had cheaper ticket prices, which was sort of not ideal either. And so Hamlet, when we did that, we actually put it in the most popular part of the season, which is in June. So we open in the middle of May and go to the end of August, and so June, July are the kind of the popular months, and May and August are trickier. So you don't want to put your trickier rep at either end. You want to have it in the middle, and it's nights of the week as well is another consideration. And so we got we gave it as much opportunity as we could, and it was a success. And the Wreckers was Stephen Langridge is our relatively new artistic director, and it was his first season in charge, and it was a brave choice of his to put on the Wreckers. And as he was saying, it was quite a process to find. We went to the British Museum to get the original score. It was the first time it was done in French, which is what she wrote it in, with her partner of the time. I can't remember his name, but it never was done in French, and it was premiered in Leipzig and she didn't like it, as he was saying, and then she did a pretty clunky English translation of it, which was not very good, and so we went back to the original, and then we had to re-orchestrate a lot of the bits and the gaps. And it was a massive undertaking, but the London Philharmonic Orchestra and Robin Ticciati, who conducted it, rose to the challenge, and our music librarian did a fantastic job in getting it all together. And I hope we're going to bring that back quite soon. It didn't win an award, but we have won awards over the years.
Wow.
At the South Bank Awards and the theatrical, what is it, TMA, is it called? Yeah. It's and actually a Poulenc double bill we did 22, which was La Voix Humaine and Les Mamelles de Thérésias. That won the best opera of the award at the National Opera at the International Opera Awards. We're picking up awards.
I look forward to Hamlet when it comes.
Did you not see it?
Can we have the microphones, please? And I'll open it to... So, yes. Can you say your name and then your question, please?
I'm Jilly. Can you tell us, do you have the next generation lined up, ready, willing and able to take over from you?
I don't.
Okay.
I have a few children, so I've got a few to choose from. But it would be rather a miracle if one of them ended up doing it. But I hope, it's unusual for a family business like Glyndebourne to have 3 generations. I think it's almost unheard of to have 4. But we shall see. I mean, and my wife is extremely engaged. She's singing The Widow in The Merry Widow this summer. And our 8-year-old son Bacchus was in Midsummer Night's Dream last year as one of the fairies.
It was a wonderful dream. I loved it.
It was a lovely dream. So and my older boys also, 3 of them have all been on stage. And they love coming, but they're all quite young. I'll know more in 5 years' time.
Yes. Any other? Yes. The Dream was quite an old production.
1981.
Yes, but it still was fresh.
Absolutely.
And it's still, you could feel the audience loved it.
Yeah, no,
Yes.
huge. It's one of the most popular productions.
Why don't you stand up and then we can
sure.
hear you better?
My name is Mimi. I love going to Glyndebourne. It's my favourite home. I call it my home, my second home. When you put on your 6 productions every summer, quite a few are returning productions, and I can think of 2 that I will never forget. One of them is The Rake's Progress, obviously, and the other one, Saul, which was an outstanding success. How many of the productions that you put on in the summer are new, and how many are returning in general?
3 new and 3 revivals, generally. Sometimes it's 2 new, depending on the scale of them. I mean, when we do a Meistersinger, that's a bit like doing two productions at once because it's so big. Saul's coming back in 25, we have a reasonably sized cupboard to store our operas, so we can store about 22 or so productions, and that's a consideration. Is how but I mean things like Midsummer Night's Dream or The Rake's Progress would never be able to throw away. I mean they're kind of timeless, and so a Glyndebourne classic or Julius Caesar, which we're doing this year, is another classic, and I think Saul is up there as well, and so it's a juggling act a bit as what, but we generally now leave it at least 3 or 4 years before we bring something back, just so because the members quite like to come and see new stuff, and after about 4 or 5 years, they can't quite remember where they saw it or not.
Right.
Don't bring it back.
Hi, Gus. Just wanted to know that the importance of drama and acting to become an opera singer, how important it is, because it's telling a story, isn't it?
Sorry?
So it's telling a story
Yes.
in opera singing. So the importance of drama and acting, how important
Very
it is.
important. Yeah, no, I
Would
mean...
you touch on that if somebody wants to become an opera singer? So they have to be good in acting and drama as well?
Good question. Yeah, I mean, most of the young choristers we have who start their careers with us are trained vocally, but they might not be trained dramatically. So since the advent of surtitles about 25 or so years ago, everyone can now understand everything that's being said. So there's more demand on the people's acting and ability. So we do have coaches with the young singers to improve their stage presence, and some of them are natural, and some of them, I mean, tenors often get it in the neck because they just like to stand there and let the audiences wallow in the sound of their voices, but they might not they kind of forget where they are sometimes, and so and we hear it all the time from directors who so we involve them in the casting process, but it's sort of in the casting process when we're figuring out who's going to sing what it is the musical bit foremost, but then it's their dramatic abilities as well, which we consider. And you get the wooden ones who are not very good at it, and so they're less likely to get cast. I think it's the whole thing. I mean, and it's the whole performance.
But it has changed so much, opera, because I remember very clearly when opera singers would just stand without moving and declaim. And
Pavarotti.
in fact, I find sometimes in some of the Eastern countries it's still the same. And I believe London was one of the first to encourage movement, to encourage acting. And I think also the younger singers tend to be a little better at acting than perhaps the older ones.
Well, I mean, Glyndebourne, Carl Abert, our original artistic director, he revolutionised opera actually, and he very much sort of introduced the whole acting bit, and we have long rehearsal periods at Glyndebourne, which allow the directors to kind of really work with their